Morning, everybody. Good morning. Bore da pawb. Welcome to this morning's, on your case, this afternoon's webinar on export opportunities in the South USA. Croeso i'r webinar ar Archwilio Cyfleoedd Allforio yn Ne'r UDA. I'm Owen O'Regan, and I'm the newly appointed Deputy Head for the Welsh Government in North America. And also presenting today is Erica Stevens, who is the head of the South of the USA for the Welsh Government for the USA. I'm based in Washington, DC, and Erica is based in Atlanta. Next slide, please. And next slide again, please. Before we get into the meat of the session, I've got some housekeeping. So if you haven't turned off your audio and video, could you turn those off, please? If you do have any questions during the session, please can you pop those in the Q&A bar on the right of your screens. We'll hopefully deal with those Q&A in the session, but if we're unable to answer those questions or we need to, or we run out of time, we'll endeavour to answer those questions via email and share them around the group after the session. After the webinar, there'll be a feedback form for you to fill in. We'd be really grateful if you could fill that in so we can adopt or change the nature of these sessions for future sessions. Next slide, please. In terms of agenda, once I finish speaking about this slide, I'll get into a very brief overview of the USA and very briefly talk about the support that the Welsh Government provide in market. I'll then hand over to Erica, who will go into the meat of the session, where she'll discuss about the American South, its economy and its opportunities. We'll then talk about travel to the USA and the impacts on travel that COVID has had before jumping to any Q&A and then wrapping up. Next slide, please. So this is a very brief overview of the USA. Next slide, please. So this is the USA. The USA, as I'm sure everyone will probably know, consists of 50 states, 1 district, and also some territories. Next slide, please. It is a federal country, so that means that it has a federal government headed by President Biden, and beneath that it has state governments for all of the states. In addition to that, it has a number of local governments underneath the states. So there's a lot of different sort of tiers of government for you to be aware of. There's no official federal language, but English is considered to be the national language. And again, as I'm sure you all know, it is significantly bigger in terms of population to Wales, with around about 328 million people living there. Next slide, please. I think this slide just reflects just how big Wales is, how big the USA is in comparison to Wales. And as somebody who's sort of newly appointed to the USA, I think I'm really since starting here how massive Wales is in comparison to Wales. So as an example, if I want to travel to the West Coast, it takes more time for me to travel to the West Coast of the USA than it does actually for me to go back home to Wales. Because it's so big, markets vary significantly, and also laws and regulations between the different states vary significantly right across the country. However, because it is so big, it has got huge opportunities. And that's why it's great that we can have a little session with you today to talk about those opportunities. But because it is so big, I think our advice as a team is always to try and focus on a specific region or specific area, because it's so much harder to concentrate as a USA as a whole, but that will differ depending on the nature of a company. That's why it's really great that we've got Erica on the call today, because she's going to focus on the South. And I think we consider the South as a place that's often overlooked by people in the UK, so it's great to highlight the benefits and the potential benefits of the South because it's so varied and has so much opportunities. Next slide, please. Very briefly, in terms of the US economy, is a massive importing country. It imports over £3,000 billion worth of imports into the country each year. In terms of what it imports, the most popular sectors are machinery, minerals, electrical equipment, and aerospace. But having said that, because it's such a massive market, it often, it imports huge amounts of any product really. So if any product you have, it's highly likely you'll be able to find a market somewhere in the USA for it. In terms of Wales's relationship with the USA, it's Wales's third biggest export destination. So almost $4 billion worth of goods goes from Wales to USA each year. I think that's a really helpful bullet point because it does show, despite the size of the USA, there have been very successful businesses that have come from Wales and exported successfully to the USA. And I think that bullet point reflects that. And very briefly, I thought I'd just touch on the USA economy. And this is something that's sort of touched me since I've been here. It is the buoyancy of the US economy. So this year, it is predicted that their economy will grow by 6%. And next slide, please. And these are just some clippings from some recent newspaper articles, and it just reflects the buoyancy of the USA market. It does really feel that it's on the up. Huge growth rates predicted, and hopefully that will be of benefit to some exporters because it might be the market is growing, and people could be able to take advantage of it. Next slide, please. In terms of supporting market, next slide. The Welsh Government have offices across the USA. It has representatives in New York City, Chicago, Washington, DC, San Francisco, and Atlanta. We're based in the embassies or consulates of those offices. And as a result, we've got a very good relationship with DIT and other UK government colleagues. We also have got a good relationship, obviously, with people in market, and also we've got a good relationship with people back home in Cardiff. So together with your trade advisors back home, hopefully we'll be able to, as a team, be able to advise you and give you as much effective advice as possible to ensure that you're able to export your goods over to market to USA should you want to. And the next two slides are just the contact details of the people in market. Next slide, please. I think we're sharing the slides after the session, or if not, we can share the contact details with you. And next slide, please. So if you've got any questions about the USA, then feel free to reach out to me or one of the other advisors in one of the other offices. I'm sure they'll be able to help you together with your trade advisors back home. Next slide. Yeah, and on that note, so that's a very brief overview of the USA and the US economy. But now for the meat of the session, and I'm pleased to hand over to Erica. So Erica, over to you.
Great, thanks, Owen. As Owen mentioned, I cover the South region for the Welsh Government, primarily helping with trade and investment. So I work to help Welsh exporters across industry export to the southern states. Next slide, please. So which states are covered in the US South region? There are various ways that US states can be divided into regions. There's the Southeast, Southwest, South Central. For our purposes, I'm showing you the map here of 11 states of the South region as far as we're concerned, which is from Texas and Oklahoma, straight across east down to Florida, and also including the states of Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the South. As many of you may be aware of some cultural or historical features of the American South, what many people don't know is the modern and industry-leading high-growth, diverse economy of the South. So if you look at the 11 states mentioned, the population total is 103 million. And many of the US's fastest growing cities in terms of relocation are in the South. There's a combined gross domestic product valued at 5.3 trillion US dollars. This is approximately twice the UK's GDP, and if the region was a country, would be the third largest economy after China. So it's quite a large economic hub. Some of the major cities include Houston, Dallas, Austin, Atlanta, Charlotte, Miami, Tampa, and Nashville. There's quite a lot in the region. And also to mention that Houston, Atlanta, and Dallas are consistently ranked with the highest number of Fortune 500 headquarters after New York City. The economy is built on a strong foundation of both industrial and agricultural. So where there's a tradition of agriculture as one of the strongest sectors in the South. As I mentioned, there's other major economic hubs and cities with strengths across many other industries. Next slide, please. So there's many advantages of starting a business in the region. One of the first, obviously, is the booming economic growth that we're seeing. There's a very pro-business environment with laws, regulations, and policies focused on business interests. There's some incredible state incentive packages and support for business, whether that's tax credits, programs for job growth, or other resources and support for small businesses. It's a very affordable cost of doing business compared to other U.S. regions in terms of labor costs, general cost of living, or land and real estate costs. There's also major international airports. For example, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport has been the world's busiest airport for 20 years. This year actually lost that based on the pandemic effects, but generally there's a number of well-connected transport links. Many of the country's busiest ports, including Savannah, Miami, Houston, Charleston, etc. And also rail transport links, interstate highways, very well connected. In addition to that, there's a diverse population, a unique culture, there's a great lifestyle, warm weather, and of course, Southern hospitality and a kind of friendly business atmosphere. More and more cities are intentionally growing their international reach and ambitions through various ways. And of course, the time zone is 5 to 6 hours behind the UK, which works well for business. And as Owen mentioned before, it's English speaking, which goes a long way in terms of doing business. Over the next few slides, I'm going to go into some highlights of some of the key industry strengths. Next slide. So starting with advanced manufacturing. Manufacturing is at the heart of the South, with aerospace and automotive being major sectors in the region. The South is home to over 20% of the automotive industry manufacturing. There's companies such as Toyota, Honda, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, I mean, all across various states in the South for production, and near that also are supply chain clusters, including tire, brake, automobile engine and parts manufacturing. And for aerospace as well, it's a booming industry in the South with Boeing in North Charleston, South Carolina, as well as Airbus in Mobile, Alabama, and the associated kind of aerospace clusters and supply chains around those. Next slide, please. So like with many places globally, tech is a strong industry in the southern states. Particularly, there's clusters in Atlanta, Austin, and Nashville. Growth for Austin's tech sector outpaces growth for the tech sector nationally in the U.S. And according to the U.S. Census, Austin is the fastest growing major metro area in the U.S. There's a trend currently of migration of startups and big firms from Silicon Valley to Austin for the ecosystem and the lower cost of doing business. For example, companies like Oracle recently announced its move from California to Austin. And every year there's South by Southwest in Austin, which is a music, tech, and film festival, which draws over 400,000 attendees in a short 2-week period. The UK DIT hosts a trade mission for UK companies every year, which has been beneficial for those UK companies and maybe of interest to Welsh companies as well. In Atlanta, there's clusters of tech, including at Georgia Tech with Tech Square. This is home to over 30 corporate innovation centers, as well as research facilities, investors, and startups. Artificial intelligence is also a big area growing in Atlanta. And there's a newly emerging cluster of cybersecurity in Augusta, Georgia, which is where the Georgia Cyber Center is, as well as the Army Cyber Command. In addition to that, organizations such as Greater Nashville Tech Council are great industry bodies bringing together local players in tech for further growth. Next slide, please. So in the financial services industry, more and more we're seeing fintech soar. Miami is the second largest financial hub outside of New York City. It's also home to the largest concentration of international banks in the US. It is known as the commercial gateway to Latin America and has a thriving tech and fintech community as well. Atlanta has become one of the top fintech hubs in the US outside of New York and San Francisco. It's been nicknamed Transaction Alley and is very strong in payments because 70% of all global financial transactions pass through companies headquartered in Metro Atlanta. Fintech Atlanta is a coalition of companies and organizations in fintech that aim at driving this growth and ecosystem forward. And then looking up at North Carolina, Charlotte is another hub of fintech. Traditionally, Charlotte has had a strong banking industry with Bank of America headquarters there, as well as other large presence of Wells Fargo and other banks. And on the back of that, fintech is growing within Charlotte. The Carolina Fintech Hub works to foster collaboration across the Carolinas, including in Charlotte. Next slide, please. So the U.S. is world leading in life sciences and med tech, and in the southern states as well. Research Triangle Park in North Carolina is world renowned for cutting edge research. It has a cluster of companies, universities, and other government institutions kind of driving that forward. Houston is home to the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical city in the world with over 60 medical institutions and treating 10 million patients annually. And within that, BioBridge is an agreement between TMC and UK DIT to provide a gateway for the advancement of life sciences between the UK and Texas Medical Center. Part of this agreement allows for UK companies to join TMCX, which is the accelerator connected to TMC. So for life sciences companies, this is a great opportunity to set up in Texas and Houston and access all of the networks there. Nashville is also a city with a strong life sciences industry, and the Nashville Healthcare Council is a central part of that. In Atlanta, there's the U.S. government's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and also in Atlanta, there's the newly created Global Health Crisis Coordination Center, GHC3, which was tasked by the CDC Foundation to share information and coordinate resources between public health, private sectors, and nonprofit organizations during this current public health crisis. In Huntsville, Alabama, we have the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology. This is a nonprofit institute where scientists, educators, and entrepreneurs translate the power of genomics into real-world results. Finally, there's the Southeastern Medical Device Association, a regional association with strong networks and high-quality events, bringing states and the industries together. Next slide, please. So finally, on to energy. Of course, I have to mention Texas for this one. Texas is the #1 state for total energy production, worth $172 trillion. It's also a national leader in wind energy. It's growing in solar and biomass. And carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a business area with momentum behind it, particularly in Houston, as ExxonMobil recently announced a $100 billion proposal for a carbon capture and storage program in Houston, as well as offshore saline reservoirs in the Gulf of Mexico. This will be a public-private partnership involving all levels of government and is a pretty large business opportunity. Next slide. So there's some current trends and areas of economic opportunity that I wanted to touch on. Firstly, the electrification of vehicles is a market poised for growth. In the South, there is a strong EV manufacturing presence. However, there's a need for EV charging infrastructure, and that's a growing area. Clean energy is also growing, as well as smart cities, which includes AI, big data, automation, robotics, all part of kind of building inclusive and equitable 21st century cities. Internet of Things is another area growing, as I mentioned as well, fintech. In terms of agricultural export, you may be aware that British beef has been allowed to export to the US last year after a 24-year ban. So there's a strong uptake in this area that we've seen, as well as a potential lift on British lamb, which if that did come along would be another market opportunity for Welsh exporters. The sport economy has some opportunities in areas such as stadium technology, performance technology, or marketing and advertising. And there's also opportunities in transportation and infrastructure. So major projects in infrastructure, whether that's bridges, roads, ports, and opportunities for small and medium enterprises in those projects. Also, life sciences and public health has always been a strong area of growth, but obviously now is another kind of trend of further opportunity. Next slide, please. So there's some success stories of businesses in Wales exporting and expanding to the US southern states over recent years. These ones represent a few examples across industry as well as across states. Moneypenny is a leading provider of telephone answering and customer contact solutions, which is based in Wrexham. They expanded to Charleston, South Carolina, and then last year opened an office in Atlanta as well. Magstim is a medtech device manufacturer in Whitland who expanded to the south with an office in North Carolina just outside of Research Triangle Park as their US base. Intelligent Ultrasound uses AI in ultrasound imaging and simulation, and they have a US headquarter office just outside of Atlanta. Concrete Canvas is an experienced exporter and just set up their new US office a couple of months ago in Houston. And Airbus, which has its wing production facility in Broughton, North Wales, opened a production facility for the final assembly line in the US in Mobile, Alabama, making use of the port of Mobile, and have about 300 workers and growing there. Next slide, please. So for companies with a presence in Wales, there's a variety of resources and support for your business. Owen touched on some of those, and to expand in that, particularly in the South, and kind of options for your company is firstly to note the Welsh Government Trade Services and Business Wales. They can help with access to attend trade shows, export missions, market entry programs. And we actually have a upcoming virtual East Coast export mission later this summer, and applications are currently open for that with the deadline coming up. So make sure to check that out if you're interested. Please use me as a point of contact for the Welsh Government office in Atlanta if you're interested in the southern states. The Department for International Trade of the UK government has a very robust network in the US, as well as sector and industry specialists. So that's definitely something to plug into for support. Another one worth connecting to is the British consulates in Atlanta, Houston, and Miami, and being a part of their network of events and of contacts. We also recommend that companies join or become a member of the British American Business Council chapters. There are several in Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, and Florida, as well as others across the US. And Welsh Government can provide other support like signposting, make introductions locally for various contacts, service providers, landing spaces, and whatever companies might find beneficial. As I mentioned, also an invaluable resource is the state or city economic development agencies and the support they can provide. And finally, if it's industry appropriate, getting into an accelerator or building a relationship with them can be extremely beneficial for growth, which we've seen companies profit from that. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand back over to Owen for the travel and impacts of COVID.
Well, thanks, Erica. That was really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just briefly touch upon the situation of the pandemic in the USA. Next slide, please. So the rate of the virus is quite stable in the USA, so it's not quite as low as it is in Wales and the UK, but it has been quite stable for some time now in general terms in the USA. The Centre for Disease Control have projected that it will fall sharply, the rate of the virus will fall sharply next month. However, having said that, there are travel restrictions on people coming into the USA. Next slide, please. So under a federal US presidential proclamation, if you've been physically present in the UK, Ireland, or the Schengen area, which is the travel area, in the 14 days before travel into the USA, you are generally prohibited from entering. That doesn't apply to US citizens or permanent residents of the USA. There are exemptions to this. So there is a national interest exemption, and there are also other exemptions. And there's a link there to a really helpful FAQs from the US Embassy in London outlining who's exempted and who's not. I am aware of Welsh companies that have been offered an exemption and were successful in getting an exemption, but I'm also aware of Welsh companies that have been rejected an exemption. So it isn't an easy process to get an exemption. Even if you are permitted to travel into the USA, just please be aware there are some steps that need to be followed before you travel into the USA and after you travel into the USA. These change all the time, so I suggest if you are allowed to travel and you do end up traveling, please just look at the Foreign Office website before you travel. If you've got any questions or you need just a pointer in the right direction on anything like this, please get in touch and we can point you into any useful resources. But as an example, for somebody like me, I had to have a PCR test before I travelled, a couple of days before I travelled to Washington, DC, and the state or Washington, DC's mayor said that on arrival I had to quarantine for 10 days. But it does vary from state to state, so please just check out the travel advice before you do travel. Next slide, please. Within the USA, there are significantly less restrictions than Wales, and that's something that sort of struck me quite quickly. So they're significantly more liberal on who you can meet, how you can meet, where you can meet, and how often you can meet. But it does vary from state to state. So again, check the state laws because it's decided by the state before you ever do any activities over here in the USA. In terms of interstate travel, there are some restrictions, and what's been surprising to me is that it does vary depending on whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. But again, it varies depending on state to state. So again, if you do come over here and you do travel, please check the relevant state laws. But again, we can point you into helpful resources if you do end up traveling. Again, for somebody like me, because I'm not fully vaccinated, I cannot travel away from the tri-state DC area without coming back and quarantining for a period of time. But on vaccination, as long as the rules don't change, on vaccination, fully vaccination, I can travel out to the tri-state area and come back and not have to quarantine. But it does vary from state to state, so please do check. Next slide, please. And yeah, just to promote the, as Erica mentioned, there's a export market visit to the USA, to the East Coast. And the applications are still open. I think it's closed 12th of June, yeah, 12th of June. So if you are interested in going on this virtual export market visit, then please get in touch with the export team. Next slide, please. And that's it for that's a brief overview of the USA and the South and the pandemic situation. I think we have had some questions. So the first one is from I think Parhau. She's asking Erica that she'd like to speak to her about a project she's working with a Texas company. Could you get in touch? I think that's fine. I think the export team have your contact details, Rhian. So Erica will probably reach out to you after this. Hiya. Hello. Yeah, we'll reach out to you. And there's a second question from Julie. Can you give clarity on FDA registration? Asking that you've tried to do this, but without customers, and has had difficulty in doing so. And I wonder if you could do it without having a customer. I don't know if you've got any. I think I've got some thoughts on it, Erica, but I'll hand over to you first.
You can go ahead and take that one.
Okay, I think you can actually have a registration without customers. I'm pretty sure you can, but we can check that out. In terms of clarity on documentation for live shellfish, we have to check that with colleagues. But again, we've got your contact details, and I'll liaise, if you haven't already, I'll liaise with colleagues in the food team and also colleagues over here, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So sorry for not giving you an answer on that, Julie, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you can get the registration, but not, I don't know on the documentation on shellfish exports. But it would be helpful if you gave us a little bit of information. If you could drop me or the export team an email just to give us a bit more detail on this, or I can drop you a call before I contact the food team. So I might email you after the session just to get a bit more information, if that's okay. And that's it. So no more Q&A. So thanks for attending your brief overview of the USA and the South. I learned some stuff from Erica. I thought the TMCX stuff about the life sciences was really interesting. I also thought the carbon capture stuff in Houston was really interesting, which I think might be of interest to people on the call. And we've got one more question that came in. Mark, so we currently supply the UK NHS. How do we approach the US? So the US health market is a lot different to the NHS back home. It's made of several markets. People tend to contact the insurance companies, but feel we'll drop you an email after the session just to find out a little bit more information about what you're inquiring about, and we can give you some tips after that. Cool.
Yeah, I was just going to
Erica,
add to that. We can set up a call because for every company it's different and there's different kind of routes to market. So it'd be good to get more information on your specific company and kind of how we can support and kind of different resources or options for plugging into the market here.
Cool. Thanks, Erica. So that's it. Thanks again for everybody for coming. Diolch yn fawr iawn for coming. It's been great to engage with you, and hopefully this has sort of shown you that the potential opportunities in the South. And if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me or Erica an email. And yeah, we really look forward to working with some of you in the future. Thank you. Diolch.